All right, let's call to order. This is going to be the City of Port Richey Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting, Wednesday, April 14, 2021. At this time, I wanted to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chairman Scott Tremblay.
Here.
Member William Dittmer.
Here.
Member Jenny Sorrell.
Here.
Member Todd McClary.
Here.
Member Tom Kinsella.
Here.
City Attorney James Matthew.
Here.
City Manager John Duke.
Here. Thank you. Looking for a motion to approve board minutes?
Motion to approve minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
At this time, we're going to open up with comments from the general public as it relates to our CRA board meeting. Would anyone like to comment or speak at this time? Seeing no hands, we're going to move on to comments from the city manager, Mr. Dude, if there are any.
Very minimal. The stakeholder meeting was held, well attended by both members of the public and business owners, stakeholders in the area.
Thank you. We're going to move on to comments from the board, and I'm going to open or have Vice Mayor Will Dittmer open with some comments.
This was our third stakeholder meeting. It was very productive having citizens there asking questions. Got a lot of feedback. The biggest point that was discussed is we need to get shovels in dirt. We need to move forward. We can't drag our feet. I think that was the number one item everybody wanted to see happen. Of the items, there were three main issues that I thought, or I took notes of. Number one is proceeding or getting the information on the closure of the Cody Avenue and US 19, but not closure, still as an exit to US 19 southbound. That's one of the other items. We discussed the one-way loop and working with heirs and the owners, business owners and citizens. They all agreed that the one-way loop, including Old Post to Treadway, would be part of the one-way loop. That of consensus, everybody thought that was probably the best way to go, so we need to look into that. And as far as getting shovels in the dirt, we want to look at doing the sidewalk extension on Old Post to Treadway is one of the first items for us to look at and get something moving. So that was an overall consensus from the meeting with the citizens and the business owners.
Thank you. At this time, I was going to open it for comments or the rest of the board.
I have none.
Mr. McClary?
I agree with that stakeholder meeting. I think we should start moving forward. I know when heirs was originally here, they were flashing numbers of $5.8 million. That was for a scope of work that really we're not looking at this point. When pressed a little further, they then, I guess, quickly reduced their budget estimate to approximately $3.3 million, which would get us redoing all of the roads, doing a bike path, a sidewalk, a walkable sidewalk along all of the respective roads. I think even at $3.3 million, that may be a little bit of a large investment from the city at this point. But I think there was definite agreement to start phasing it in and directing heirs to start looking at a phase 1 sidewalk on Treadway, phase 2, and whatever phase 3 may be, and breaking it down into manageable chunks. So I think that's a great idea, and I think that's a good way to get the shovels in the ground as quickly as possible and see what is the most logical breakdown of those scopes of work where we can get it into manageable pieces of, assuming $500 to $1 million per chunk or something of that nature. And then that also enables us to get the businesses to buy in and maybe start looking for grants and spreading those costs, make our dollars go farther in terms of city. So that's all I had.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sorrell?
I'm good. I'd just like to see us get started on it.
Yes, ma'am. All right, I think that's all the comments from the board. I want to move on to board business, which is going to be the discussion of the meeting with heirs, city staff, and stakeholders. So that's actually the item, so we're going to go into the actual discussion.
And that was the items.
He jumped the gun, I jumped the gun, so we all
Yeah, we
jumped the
did.
gun.
So,
That was the items. So-
okay. No, I
Excuse me
got
for-
you, but I wanted
Yeah.
to kind of officially get there since it's,
Well, I think they did say they would break it down for us, and we discussed ways of doing that, as starting with that sidewalk on Old Posted Treadway, working our way down Treadway, making these changes, but built into the whole scope, so we're not redoing things or doing things twice. Room for landscaping, like extending the one-way on Old Posted Treadway. That's our narrowest easements right there. It's so skinny. So that makes a lot of sense to do it that way, to give us additional bicycle path and walkways. So those things, and Chris from Ayers said that they could break it down into bite-sized chunks. And I think that's just a good way to approach it. I'd like to see these items on the next agenda, that we can get some information from those on those 3 points. That's all I have.
thank you. One of the things that I wanted to discuss since we're here, I think that we're looking at a really large scope project for a small city. But I think one of the things that I'd like to do, and one of the things we should think about up front, are where the points of contention or the issues are going to crop up in this large scope project. And I'd like to deal with those right up front, so we don't get halfway through the project and realize, well, we need a tract of land, or we need some things that aren't readily accessible to the city. And there's a couple different areas down there that I would think that we need to at least address how we may want to approach it up front. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because for example, we know that we have business, and I think it's Catches, wanting us to set aside basically some city property for their usage. And I think that leaves us some room for negotiation there, but I think that's something that should be done up front and not on the back end.
I agree with that, but also Mr. Duke did have a meeting with Lowe's regarding the vacating of Bridge Street and possible things that council was looking for.
Correct. I've met with the owners of Catches a couple of times, but most recently this week, and they are interested in having the city vacate Bridge Street to accommodate their business plans. There's some infrastructure challenges, even if the city did abandon Bridge Street and the park. But I told them that's a valuable piece of property, and they needed to, in their proposal, at the point that they bring that to the city and ask for the city to give them Bridge Street, what does the city get in return for that? And gave them a couple of possibilities, but that's on the owners to determine what they would be willing to make available to the city. I think it's also would be relevant for the CRA board and the city council to have some ideas of what's it worth to you, and what do you want in return for the consideration of giving up some city property that it does have value, does have water contact, does have waterfront, but fits into the Lowe family's business plan. There's some very real infrastructure issues that would have to be addressed. There's a water line and a sewer line that run right down along Bridge Street. Those can't be abandoned. We'd have to maintain easements and access to get into those, have to have some assurance that the business activity would not damage that infrastructure. So there's some devil in the details kinds of things, but at this point, it's, what are the Lowe's interested in trading for ownership of Bridge Street, and then what does the city want in return for giving up their street, if the city is interested in giving up their street. So I left them with the charge to go back and look at the map and figure out what it's worth to them, but told them that at the point that they officially ask for abandonment of the street, they're going to have to tell the city council, here's what we'll give you in exchange for the street. I made it clear to them the city's not going to just give up the street.
And the point I was making is I know that that's just one issue that I could think of off the top of my head, but I wanted to address those up front before we start dedicating money and getting shovels in the ground, if you will. Not that I don't want to do that, but I don't want to get shovels in the ground and then run into an issue that we have some of these things that crop up later that I think should be dealt with up front.
Yeah, one of the things that Chris did mention is that all the things that we're talking about all are not using any private areas. That's all currently under control or city-owned. So if we expand the scope, we get more involved with some of the businesses down there. But as it sits right now, the initial design used nothing but city property.
Because the other issue that I see that's going to crop up, this is a practical matter, is I know that there's an area where the city owns a road that runs all the way down into basically where Seaside is, and it opens up into like a little roundabout.
The
And-
end of Treadway.
Right, correct. And as a practical matter, most of the businesses down there utilize that for parking, but I think as we develop that, it's going to create some friction. But I want to see if we can address those issues before we start to develop it so the businesses can understand that what we're doing and can plan around accordingly, whether it's parking issues, lighting issues, whatever issues they're going to run into as we develop that. So I wanted to kind of identify some of those issues and get them on a meeting so we can address them.
Excuse me. The master plan overall doesn't pay much attention to that little road to Seaside. Theoretically, any development that goes up there would almost address that road because that's their access road to the Seaside. Presumably, Seaside will not be there in its current form forever. But to the same extent, if there was a redevelopment of that, that's what almost would address that road in and of itself for turnaround for fire trucks or whatever the case may be. The master plan, to my understanding from what Ayers had, was largely, I'll call it the P, a one-way P of Treadway to Bayview, and that is all within city-owned property. So we can start proceeding with phase one, whatever phase one is, as is the logical breakdown. And then that offshoot would really just feed into that one-way loop. As far as Bridge Street goes, that is more impacted by the potential golf cart or under bridge crossing. I think I get in trouble if I say golf cart crossing, but the under bridge crossing under Route 19, that's where that is probably more important to the city as opposed to just this development here, because they're almost separate projects, although they are entwined. And I'm not saying they're not going to influence one another, but I don't see the need to. We have some time to work out the Bridge Street, and I'll pick on that one specifically, and I keep pointing at John for some reason. I have no idea why. The Bridge Street, we have some time. From my understanding, the county nor the state is doing a golf cart or an underbridge crossing under Route 19 anytime in the very near future. So we have a little bit of time to negotiate that. That's not our biggest issue right now. I think our biggest issue right now from a safety perspective is getting some walkable paths and lit paths around that waterfront overlay district and seeing how we can build up that. And then as we build up that area and developers want to come in there's plenty of vacant land still in that area as a ratio basis, start working with those new developers to see how we can further improve those areas.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I agree that obviously we want to deal with those public safety issues first and get those developed as quickly as possible. But what I'd like to do is also come up with some kind of tentative plan on what we want to do with those parcels of land, so the businesses can plan around what we're doing, and like I said, those are going to be points of contention because that's valuable land that we have, and even though it's not in the Ayers master P plan, as you put it, it's an offshoot. It has a lot of value to the city too. It can be an Uber pickup drop off. It can the,
We discussed that, exactly.
We actually did discuss that. They
Yeah.
put it in several areas already, so.
So, but I guess the point is if you start to develop that and you make it a station or whatever, and you put a curb around there, and all of a sudden Hooters loses a bunch of parking, and Guild Dogs loses parking, and Seaside loses
Well,
parking.
they shouldn't be parking on that road to begin with, so.
That's my point. But as a practical matter, that's been going on. So as you change that, it's
Yeah,
gonna
but
create
that's
issues.
not our problem, that's their problem.
Correct.
And we would not give up a street so Hooters could have additional parking.
The point is I think we should address that so the businesses know what's going on up front.
I think we're getting the cart before the horse again, moving too far in the things that aren't going to affect these small items that we want to get started with. I agree we have to address them, but at this point, if we keep pushing back, it's going to be the same thing all over again. It's going to be another 20 years and nothing's going to get done. So when we discussed it that's what we decided. We said, let's do something small. Let's get shovels in the ground, do things that aren't going to impact. That sidewalk's not going to impact anybody. The changing the routing is really not going to change it, and closing off the US 19 and Cody is not going to be a real impact to anybody. So that's why we kind of decided on these items might be the good initial things to move forward on. And I agree with you. We will have to address those items, but I don't want to see it holding up the start of the project.
But I was thinking you may be able to do both because for example, if we are going to put $200,000 towards our contribution, which was for, I think we already earmarked it for lighting
And sidewalks.
and sidewalks, is that correct, Mr.
Yep.
Matho?
I believe so. I asked Mr. Duke to pull out the
Okay.
actual amendment, and he'll get it to you. But I believe that's correct.
I'm
That is
positive
correct.
it was.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
positive too, yeah.
Okay, it's around 200,000. See, we're waiting now on Treasury and the county so we can begin that dredging project, and I think they might be looking to see how quickly you start doing that commitment.
And my point is I think you have the master P loop, which we're talking about, but why couldn't we use the 200,000 just as a suggestion to develop that little area so the businesses already know what we're doing down there as well? Because that was kind of more of a collateral thing in the AIR's plan, but we do have the 200 grand to use down there.
Why would we spend 200,000 to develop an offshoot to a side road when we have safety issues in a heavily traveled road?
Because you have separate projects, you're going to have money that's earmarked, and I guess you can overlap the projects and
Well, that could be phase two as we move down Treadway. We discussed moving, down the roads and around the corner and doing it in chunks, and I agree with that. But I think you're going to be surprised at how little $200,000 goes.
Yeah, 200,000 isn't going to go very far, and there's going to be additional funding requirements to that. Two, whatever happens to that seaside, I mean, we own the road. That's all we own in leading into Seaside. One, people shouldn't be parking on it, and so that shouldn't even count into a business equation. That, I'm going to use public property for parking when there's no on-street parking in the city. If that is in their business equation, they're not doing business correctly. So I'm less concerned about that. But two, if there is a development potential, Mr. Dude is going to be working with that developer to say, okay, well, first of all, that section of Treadway is a total disaster, and you're going to make it even worse when you run all your trucks over it. So you're going to be repaving it likely at the end of the day. So we have our right of way. At that point, we can use it to put in curbs or something of that nature, but there's going to be some give and take from the developer at that portion of the street. We don't even know what's occurring there. For all we know, Seaside may sit in that very same condition for the next 20 years. Right now, we have an issue of the P loop that we have a plan, we have the property, and we have a line to the funding, and we have a breakdown. We should be moving along that and take that secondary project to the side, because right now it's really not affecting anybody.
I agree. I 100% with the idea of starting the P loop and starting with the lighting and sidewalks, which are the fundamental safety issues that we have down there. 100%. But what I was saying collaterally, as we do that, we still want to identify these issues and address them as they come up. And from my perspective, the sooner the better. is all I guess
Yeah,
the point I was making.
I mean, I think as we develop through, opportunities are going to pop up, and you know, people are going to bring their desires to the city and say, how can we best work this out? And of course, we want to do it. I think it's great we have this overall master plan of what we want to do for the Cody River Landing area. And you know, I think in being in those meetings, the business leaders and everyone are on the same track of what they want this to look like at the end of the day. We just have to first start the shovels in the ground so we can start seeing some progress. I know the Restore Act people, they're going to want to see some progress fairly quickly because they'll say, hey, yeah, you got your dredging, but you also promised me streetlights and sidewalks, so that better be going through, and I better see a plan for that being done kind of coincidentally with the dredging, or else you're not going to be getting any of your money at the end of the day because you're not fulfilling your requirements. So we are on the hook right now to start something fairly quickly.
No, I agree with that. And then the other thing I was going to raise, which Vice Mayor touched on, was the traffic pattern. Is that something that we're going to address up front in terms of
Well, we have to close out the 19, we have to get that done first.
first? That's why I asked him about it
Yeah, so
earlier.
that has to
Correct.
get done first. And then the traffic pattern, that was the next consensus, would be the next easiest thing to do. The only difference was that AIR's provided us with 3 or 4 different scenarios on that. And the conclusion that everybody seemed to agree on was, since we have no easements and it's very narrow at the old post from Cody to Treadway, it's a very narrow area, to go ahead and include that in the one-way
Make it
to
a true
Treadway.
loop.
So it's a true loop.
And then
Exactly.
Cody, on the way out, you'd be able to take a right and get out.
Correct.
What
Sure.
my recommendation to that is go back to AIRS, because obviously they have the traffic specialists, they know what to do. And as part of their phasing plan, at what point would we implement, according to the phasing plan, you know, the various one-way or closures of streets or whatever, and let them tell us, the traffic experts, say, well, what's going to be the least impactful holistically as we are working our way through this area. So my guess is, you know, let's assume phase 1 is the sidewalks along Treadway. Well, if that's our only scope of work right now, making Old Post the one-way probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm speculating at this point, but as you're working your way around, you know, especially once you get to Cody, and maybe that's phase 3, that's the time you close Old Post or make it a one-way and implement that fully. But really, the AIRS should be the one who's informing us or at least advising us
When we need to do that.
when is it best to start implementing these.
I agree, but people still have a problem changing traffic.
Yeah.
They're still going the wrong way. So I think the sooner the better that we don't do part of it and then leave part open and then go back later and add that to the one-way. I think it's gonna be an issue. So I think if we do that, I think we just need to bite the bullet and make it all the way around.
Well, part of the problem though with making Old Post one way, you're now restriping Old Posts and you're taking out you're redoing that whole area to accommodate a one-way now. Is that double work? And that's where we have to kind of be a little careful with it.
Actually, you're talking about, what, maybe 75 yards, 100 yards from one to the other. And basically all you would need at that point would be 2 do not enter signs at the corner to get it started.
Yeah.
But like I said, if we don't do that part of it, and then we come back 2 months later and then add that part, it's just gonna be confusion. So I just think that, I stop people on my walk every day, tell them they're going the wrong way of Treadway. And that's been there for a year.
And maybe they'll come back and say, well, you know what, you want to do Treadway. Maybe they come back and say you should close it all down. I think they should inform us.
But I thought that's what they did. That was one of their suggestions, that we continue to go ahead and do that.
They said ultimately, yes, make the one-way loop 100%. The when is when it was more open to discussion, because they really didn't have an idea of where we're breaking down our segments. So that's where I'm coming from. Let them tell us the work plan.
So let me ask you this. Is the board in agreement that phase 1, or the first part of this project, the scope, you will be lighting and sidewalks starting at Old Post at the intersection of Treadway and then down Treadway? Is that kind of what the consensus
That's where they wanted to start, where they recommended starting. I think the question that we as a board have to tell them is, what is a manageable chunk for phase one? What is a manageable chunk from a dollar perspective? When do we run out of dollars for phase one? $200,000 will likely not get you even down Treadway.
No, you're gonna need $1 million probably to get down Treadway and all that.
Probably less. I mean, the whole thing they said was 3.3.
Yeah.
So let's say we have $800,000 chunks,
Okay.
making it up. Let's do 800,000. We have to inform them as a board. I'm just throwing out numbers here, but we have to tell them, all right, well, we want a 4-phase plan, $800,000 per chunk. How would you do it, give or take, based on your pricing? And they were also going to be working on a more definitive budget based on what we were talking about.
Right, we also thought possible that sidewalk could be something that's done in-house here with the city employees as well, because it's nothing engineering-wise is that complicated.
Yeah, I'm always leery about, no offense to our public works workers, but generally it doesn't work out well for the city when they do that.
But either way, I think what we need to do is get back with heirs, tell them the three items.
We need to tell them what,
Yes.
yeah, how are we what chunks do we want to break down? Where do we want to start?
And
then
how much it's gonna cost.
And how much is it going to cost? Because I'm thinking $3.3 million, 4 phases, $800,000 per. Tell me where you're planning on going.
Can we price out just, I guess, ask them to price out just from Old Post, the corner there, down to Treadway and down Treadway, and then see whether or not that cost is manageable and move
I
forward?
believe I asked for that, we were at the meeting, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're waiting on a cost
Yeah,
estimate.
we actually asked them kind of already for a phasing plan. We didn't
Okay.
give them any specifics to how many phases or any of that, but they are starting to gear towards phasing it out in some
breaking it
fashion.
down.
But it's going to be 800 to $1 million per phase.
Okay. And then the other thing, just to kind of step away, I wanted to ask Mr. Gibb, you were at the meeting as well, correct? And are you going to participate in the recommendations as well when you get the heirs? In other words, have some recommendations aligned with whatever heirs finds and then bring
Yes.
it back to us?
Yes.
Okay. And did they give us a timetable as to how long it would take them to get some kind of phasing with the pricing, with the different phases?
They did not give me a timeline. I placed a call to heirs this morning and haven't gotten a response back yet, but I'll follow up with them again tomorrow morning and see if I can get some more concrete details for you.
Okay. And then the other question is, do you guys, are you guys comfortable? Because I asked him to put the $200,000 on for the next meeting for CRA.
Well, that's your design
What's
fees,
that?
basically. That's going to be your design fees, basically,
Okay.
for getting it through.
Well, the question is whether or not you can use that $200,000 to at least go from the end of Old Post down to Treadway, because you still have a little piece there that needs to be done and some other things. So at least there'll be something to show for whatever we're doing.
Here's the other
Just
good part.
asking, I'm
Yeah,
putting that
here's the
out.
other good part about phasing it out. You can associate the design fees with the respective phase. So your design fees, instead of being $200,000 for the entire thing, again, making up numbers here, you're going to be $30,000 down Treadway. That leaves you $170,000 for sidewalks. So it'll get you partly down Treadway, and then we're going to have to throw in some additional cash. But at least then it's the breakdown, and then he can design his DD and his CD sets to those respective phases. It's going to cost you more from a design perspective to do it because you're not doing it the best way. And maybe we want to talk to them about their overall design, and since it's would be such a large contract, I don't even know if it goes out to bid then or not. But that's something we also need to kind of investigate.
I guess the point I'm driving at is from a legal standpoint, can we combine the $200,000 of the project we're doing and put it as towards phase one? If it's going to be sidewalk and lighting.
Well, it would be phase one.
If you spend $200,000 or more on, presuming it's lighting and sidewalks, they're not going to care that it's part of a larger project.
Yeah.
I don't see
Okay.
that's a problem.
Yeah,
So we just loop that into what we're doing.
Yeah.
And
And as far as going out to bid, is once you get into construction, this isn't a design build. We're going to do sidewalks and they're going to be X dollars. We're going to follow the bidding process.
Okay. So I don't see the need to put the 200,000 specifically on then necessarily.
I don't think so either.
We just address it all at the next meeting, or whenever we get the phase one information back, if that's okay.
Yep. I think if we take those three items, have Ayers look at those first, have them come back to us, and then we can put that on the agenda for the next meeting. I agree with that.
Okay. You okay with that?
I'm great with it, let's go.
All right.
Yeah. Cool.
We've been talking about it for years.
Yes, we
Let's
have.
do something.
All right, so
If
that's,
we can put one shovel in the ground right now, it can put it.
Let's go get a couple bags of concrete. We'll go right down there, dig a little hole,
Make a corner on it, then use the old hoe.
and say we did something.
Well, it'll be big in it.
all right, so I think that closes out the discussion, if that's okay on the board business. I'm going to take, there weren't really any motions on the table, but I don't think, I did call in comments from the general public, and I don't think anyone had.
I signed up.
Ms. Rogers, come on up. Yeah.
Pat Rogers, 4838 Sunset Boulevard. First question is, how long will it take to get the okay to close the inbound Cody River from US 19? Because it seems like if that's done, the first thing to do would be to set up everything as one way and then start working on your sidewalks and lighting. That way you'll have people trained to go use it the way you want it used. But do we know how long it's going to take to get the approval?
I believe we've gotten some information back on different options that we can look at to do that closure.
We have, we got three options, plus a fourth penciled into the margins was close the intersection. So, and I've reached out to Richter to move the closure up to the top, give us some information on that. So they'll be fleshing that out for us.
It just seems like the most sensible way to go.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I think that closes out, I guess, old board business. Old business, I guess I'll start just to touch on procedurally what I'd like to do as we get into the CRA discussions with our board is any of the general public that wants to comment. I want to try and do that before and not after. So moving forward, when we call comments from the general public is when I'm going to take all the comments just procedurally moving forward. But that's all the old business I had. I was going to pass it to any of the other board members.
I'm fine, thank you.
I have nothing.
Okay. With that, I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.